Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are wading into some very complicated waters.
Definitely.
We're talking about international migration, refugee cooperation, and this is an area where, facts can get twisted so easily.
Oh, absolutely. Rumors take on a life of their own, especially when you hear phrases like secret agreements. That's a trigger for a lot of people.
It really is. It creates this immediate anxiety, this fear that something is happening behind closed doors that affects national sovereignty.
And often that's not what's happening at all. Or at least the reality is far more nuanced.
Exactly. And our focus today is to cut through all of that speculation. We have a single, very specific, and I have to say, very carefully worded official document.
Mm-hmm.
It's a statement that was issued by the government of Antigua and Barbuda, we'll call them A and B, on January 5th, 2026.
And this statement was put out for a very specific reason, right? To push back against those exact rumors.
Precisely. It was designed to clarify their engagement with the United States on what appears to be a global initiative involving third country nationals. So, our mission in this deep dive is pretty straightforward.
Just the facts.
Just the facts, based only on this official statement. We want to understand the actual nature of what's being proposed, what they're cooperating on.
And, crucially, the safeguards. The protections they claim to have put in place.
Yes, and the broader diplomatic context, because nothing happens in a vacuum. We need to figure out what's binding, what's, discretionary, and who exactly are we even talking about here.
And that clarification is so necessary, especially for a small sovereign nation like Antigua and Barbuda. I mean, the stakes are just incredibly high.
In what way?
Well, the statement directly confronts these claims of a secret or binding agreement, which, as you said, immediately raises flags about fundamental national concerns.
Yeah.
We're talking about sovereignty, national security, and, of course, humanitarian responsibility.
A tough balancing act.
A very tough balancing act. And what I find most fascinating, just reading through this, is the language. It's so careful. It's almost surgical.
Right.
It's designed to define the terms of this cooperation, not as a concession, and definitely not as a surrender, but as a measured diplomatic gesture, one that's taken under absolute national control.
They're trying to thread a needle. They want to show they're responsible global citizens.
Without giving up a single inch of autonomy. That's the game.
Okay, so let's do it. We are dissecting this one official statement, so we have to be incredibly precise. We have to capture every nuance of A and B's communication on this.
Every phrase, every number matters.
Let's jump straight in with the biggest claim they had to fight, this idea of a secret binding agreement. How did they dispel that myth? All right, so let's unpack this. The claims swirling around locally were, as we said, about some kind of secret deal, one that could, potentially force Antigua and Barbuda to accept individuals against their will without any real control.
And that's the core of the political firestorm, right? The fear of losing control over your own borders.
Exactly. So, let's go directly to the source. What is the fact they lead with?
They state it as clearly as humanly possible. The government says, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, that Antigua and Barbuda has not entered into any binding agreement with the United States to accept deportees or refugees.
So that's it. The categorical denial. That's the foundation of their entire defense.
It is. But that denial is immediately followed by a really important explanation of what does exist. And this is where the legal details start to matter a lot.
Okay.
The statement clarifies that the instrument under discussion is a non-binding memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, which was proposed by the United States.
And this is where my eyes usually glaze over. MOU, treaty, agreement, but you're saying that distinction is everything.
It changes the entire conversation. In international relations, the difference between a formal treaty and a non-binding MOU is just, it's immense. And it's something the public often gets confused by.
So break it down for us. What's the real world difference?
Okay, so think of a formal treaty. That's the heavyweight champion of international agreements. It typically requires legislative ratification. So in this case, you'd have to go through A and B's parliament for a vote.
Like a new law.
Exactly like a new law. And once it's ratified, it creates defined, enforceable legal obligations under international law. If A and B signed a treaty and then broke its terms, they could be held accountable, they could face sanctions, or be taken to an international tribunal. There are real consequences.
So an MOU is what, the lightweight version? Can you give us an analogy?
A good analogy might be, a formal treaty is like a complex, notarized, ironclad real estate contract. It's legally enforced, and there are specific penalties for any breach. An MOU, on the other hand, is more like a detailed handshake agreement between two big companies.
Okay.
They might write down, we intend to cooperate on projects A, B, and C, as long as it remains mutually beneficial. It signals serious intent, it provides a working framework, but it typically lacks that hammer of legal enforceability.
So you can walk away.
The parties agree to the spirit of cooperation, but they retain maximum flexibility and, crucially, the right to walk away.
That immediately makes me wonder then, why would a superpower like the U.S. even bother with an MOU? Why not push for a formal, legally binding treaty, especially on an issue this big?
That is a fantastic question, and it tells you a lot about the U.S. strategy here. It suggests their primary goal is speed and breadth of cooperation over absolute legal commitment from any one country.
They're playing a numbers game.
They're facing a global crisis. They need dozens of countries, maybe more, to engage quickly. Imagine trying to negotiate over 100 separate formal treaties. That would take years, maybe decades, of legislative review and political battles all across the globe.
It would be a nightmare.
A total logistical and political nightmare. So, by using a flexible instrument like an MOU, the U.S. is signaling that this initiative is collaborative, not coercive.
And for a country like A&B, that's a much easier pill to swallow.
Of course. It removes that immediate threat of surrendering sovereignty or being legally forced to accept people against their own internal judgment. The non-binding nature of the MOU is, in and of itself, A&B's primary defense against those rumors of coercion.
And crucially, the statement goes on to frame this not as some isolated backroom deal aimed solely at them, but as a global effort.
Yes, part of a much larger diplomatic strategy.
They make a point of highlighting that A&B was approached by the U.S. along with more than 100 governments worldwide.
That number is massive. And its essential context, it's also a very, very smart diplomatic move for A&B to publicize that fact.
Why is it so smart?
Well, imagine if this were a unique bilateral agreement with only Antigua and Barbuda. The domestic political pressure would be crushing.
People would be asking, why us? Why were we singled out?
What did our government give away to get this deal? Exactly. It would look like they were desperate or being taken advantage of. But by acknowledging that over 100 other countries have also been approached, including, major U.S. allies in Europe, and Asia A&B reframes the whole thing.
So it's not an act of weakness anymore.
No, it becomes an act of participation in a normal, multilateral humanitarian discussion. It legitimizes their engagement. It says, we're not being targeted, we're being consulted as part of a global community.
They also get more specific, mentioning that several governments within the Caribbean community, or CARICOM, were also approached. Let's just quickly clarify what CARICOM is, because that regional angle is important here too.
Right. CARICOM is the main regional bloc. It's made up of 15 Caribbean nations and dependencies. For a country like A&B, maintaining solidarity and policy alignment within CARICOM is absolutely vital.
For trade, for security.
For everything. Regional stability, economic cooperation, shared security. If A and B were the only CARICOM state considering this MOU, it could cause real diplomatic friction within the region. Other members might feel they were breaking ranks.
But by confirming the request was sent out regionally,
they demonstrate that they're just participating in a regional conversation. It reinforces their claim that this isn't some unique, targeted trade-off. It's just part of a global discussion that their neighbors are also having, which takes a lot of the political heat off.
Okay, so the instrument is non-binding, the initiative is global, and it's happening at a regional level too. That's the high-level context. But let's dig into the practical protections, the specific clauses written into this understanding that A&B says guarantee their autonomy.
The fine print.
The fine print. Because this is what really refutes that idea of coercion. This is where they show that they hold all the cards. Let's break down the 3 specific points of control they emphasized. First, we've already touched on it, but the statement reiterates it again. The understanding creates no legal obligation on Antigua and Barbuda.
And it really bears repeating, because it's the absolute foundation of their defense. Without a legal obligation, A&B's decision-making process remains entirely domestic. It's based on their own laws and their own national interests.
So they can't be sued, essentially.
They aren't opening themselves up to international legal challenges or, claims that they must accept someone under the terms of the agreement. It preserves their complete sovereign right to just say no.
Okay, that's number 1. The second one is a huge political assurance. They stress that the government is committed to no quotas or automatic acceptance of any persons.
It is huge. This point directly counters the fear of being overwhelmed, of having waves of people sent to them. That's a major, major concern for any small state with limited resources.
And we've seen other agreements in the past where that has been a problem.
We have. Historically, there have been agreements where countries effectively become outsourced processing centers with specific volume targets they have to meet. A&B is making it crystal clear that this is not that.
By explicitly stating no quotas.
Right. No quotas means they maintain absolute control over the flow, the pace. They're making it clear that even if they agree to participate, they're the ones turning the tap on and off. It's entirely dictated by their own capacity and their national comfort level. It prevents the whole thing from becoming some kind of conveyor belt operation.
And then there's the third one, which it feels like the ultimate trump card. The arrangement may be terminated at any time at Antigua and Barbuda's sole discretion.
This is the kill switch, the non-negotiable ultimate safeguard.
At their sole discretion. That language is powerful.
It's everything. The ability to terminate the entire non-binding arrangement instantly, unilaterally, and without any penalty.
Yeah.
It completely refutes any claim of a coercive or binding deal. If at any point A&B feels the U.S. is pushing too hard,
Or if the politics at home get too hot.
or if the process reveals some unforeseen security risk, they can just pull the plug. It's over.
So A&B holds the veto power not just over individual cases,
But over the continuation of the entire understanding. It transforms the agreement from a potential liability, a potential trap, into a highly manageable conditional diplomatic tool. This is really the linchpin of their entire defense of their national control. Okay, so to really understand why a country like A&B would even consider this, even with all those safeguards, we have to look at the why.
the motivation.
Exactly. The humanitarian reality that is driving the U.S. to propose this MOU in the first place. The statement actually gives us some context on the U.S. side of the equation.
What does it say?
It says the U.S. currently hosts the largest number of refugees globally. Their asylum and immigration systems are, to put it mildly, severely strained.
We hear about that in the news all the time.
Right, and this immense burden managing this vast population of people who are legally entitled to protection is the stated reason for proposing this shared responsibility initiative to over 100 countries.
So they're basically asking for help.
They're asking the global community for diplomatic solidarity and practical assistance in processing and resettling individuals who were already on U.S. soil.
Okay, so it's critical then that we define exactly who we're talking about. Who are these people in the context of this specific agreement? Because this is usually where the rumors get the facts completely wrong.
It is the most important distinction. According to the statement, the U.S. is seeking cooperation for individuals who cannot be returned to their countries of origin,
Why not?
because doing so would expose them to serious harm, to persecution, or to grave reprisals. This isn't just a casual definition. This is a very specific international legal definition of a refugee.
These are people with genuine, verified claims for protection. They can't just be sent home safely.
That's right. And you mentioned a legal point a moment ago that I think is worth expanding on for a minute. You brought up the principle of non-refoulement. It sounds technical, but it's at the heart of all of this.
It does sound technical. Break it down for us.
It's a French term, non-refoulement, and it's the absolute cornerstone of international refugee law. The meaning is actually simple and deeply humanitarian. It's the fundamental principle that prevents a country from forcing a person back to a place where they face death, torture, or persecution.
So it's a moral and legal backstop.
It's the ultimate backstop. A simple way to think of it is this. If a building is on fire and someone escapes, non-refoulement is the rule that says the fire department or anyone else cannot legally push that person back into the burning building.
That's a powerful analogy.
So the people we're talking about here are individuals who have been legally determined to face a serious, credible danger if they return home. They are not simply economic migrants looking for a better job. They are people with verified protection needs under international law.
So, to summarize, the U.S. is seeking cooperation to share this responsibility for these non-criminal refugees who are legally entitled to protection. And the statement also makes a point of saying many other countries have already agreed to similar non-binding understandings.
Exactly. The whole initiative is framed as a response to a humanitarian situation. It focuses specifically on the most vulnerable. And that legal framing is so important because it fundamentally changes the conversation away from general border control or migration management and moves it toward genuine protection needs.
Which politically allows A&B to justify this step on moral grounds. It's not just about diplomatic necessity.
It's about being a responsible member of the international community that upholds humanitarian law.
Okay, now we have to address the elephant in the room, the biggest rumor, the one that drives the most public fear.
But A and B is becoming a dumping ground.
Exactly. The statement is incredibly explicit in addressing this. It says A and B is not agreeing to accept deportees, nor is it agreeing to serve as a repository for individuals who have been rejected by other countries.
A very important clarification.
So what is the actual scope? The understanding, they say, relates only to lawfully screened third country nationals, including refugees who are already present in the United States.
And this semantic and legal difference is something we just cannot overstate, especially in the domestic political context.
A deportee versus a refugee.
They are two entirely different categories of people. A deportee is an individual who is being removed, often for violating immigration laws or, crucially, for committing a crime.
Right.
A refugee, in this specific context, is defined by their humanitarian need and, critically, a lack of a criminal history, having already gone through a legal screening process. The two populations carry vastly different social risks and security risks.
So by firmly stating we are not taking deportees,
A and B is guaranteeing to its citizens that they are not becoming a destination for failed asylum seekers, or, more importantly, for criminal removals. That is a major security concern for any small state when they engage in these kinds of agreements. It strictly limits the population under consideration to only those with established, verified humanitarian claims who have already been processed legally in the U.S.
But even then, there's another line of defense, the vetting process. The statement details these really stringent requirements for acceptance. It says A and B must be fully satisfied on two key fronts. It's like a double-check system.
Yes.
First, they require full satisfaction on intelligence vetting. And second, full satisfaction on national security assessments.
And this just highlights the retained control we were talking about earlier. Acceptance is explicitly conditional on A and B's internal judgment. It's their call.
So it's not just taking the U.S.'s word for it.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The U.S. may conduct the initial rigorous screening, and it is rigorous, but A and B is not simply accepting the U.S. stamp of approval. They are explicitly retaining the right to perform their own due diligence, or at the very least to review all the intelligence provided and render their own judgment based on their own specific national security concerns.
That's interesting. What kind of risks might a small nation like A and B be looking for that, say, U.S. vetting might not prioritize as highly?
That's a great question. For a small island state, security risks are highly localized. They might be worried about identity fraud that could be tied to regional criminal networks.
Things the U.S. wouldn't even be looking for.
Potentially, yes. Or they might look for individuals who could seek to exploit the country's specific travel access or its financial system. U.S. vetting is, naturally, focused on threats to the U.S. mainland.
Right.
A and B's vetting, even if it's just reviewing U.S. data, would be focused through a different lens, a lens of threats to their local stability, potential organized crime links, money laundering risks, or maybe past affiliations in their home country that could destabilize the very small, very tight-knit social fabric of the island.
So if the U.S. says this person is clean, A and B can still say, well, not for us.
Absolutely. If the intelligence vetting conducted by U.S. authorities is deemed insufficient by A and B's own intelligence apparatus, or if their national security assessment raises any red flags for local officials, A and B retains the absolute power to say no.
And the bottom line, according to this statement, is that acceptance would only happen if it posed no risk to the country or its people. That language is clearly designed to reassure the public.
It's putting the principle of national safety above the principle of diplomatic cooperation.
So the U.S. does the initial screening and imposes the individual.
But A and B maintains the final discretionary national security clearance. This dual-layer approval mechanism ensures that their commitment to being a good-faith diplomatic partner does not and will not override their fundamental obligation to protect their own people. Okay, so let's move into the practical mechanics of this. How would this non-binding MOU actually be managed on the ground? And this gets back to the sheer amount of control A and B says it has retained.
Right.
What's really fascinating here is the explicit statement that A and B retains the absolute right to reject any individual proposed by the United States.
Not just categories of people, but any single person.
Any single person. This reiterates the discretionary nature of the MOU right down to the individual level. The U.S. cannot compel them to accept anyone. Even if an individual passes all the U.S. screenings and then they pass A and B's own security review, A and B can still reject them.
For what reason?
For any reason at all. Perhaps they feel there's an overrepresentation of a certain nationality already on the island, or they have temporary capacity limitations, or maybe they just don't feel comfortable with that specific person's profile or origin. The ultimate authority rests solely and completely with the government of Antigua and Barbuda.
And it's important to stress this next point. The statement emphasizes that all cases would be considered strictly on a case-by-case basis.
Yes.
There is no batch processing. No automatic transfers are possible under this arrangement.
And that detail is so crucial for showing the public that A and B is engaging in active personalized vetting. They're not just accepting a pre-approved list site unseen.
It requires real work, bureaucratic effort, specific ministerial sign-off for every single person they might accept.
And that case-by-case review is a powerful signal of retained sovereignty. It requires human judgment. It requires specific authorization for every single person. It ensures that no surrender of sovereignty, no transfer of authority, and no loss of control over their borders or national security takes place.
That's the government's carefully constructed message anyway.
It is. And it's logical. I mean, if they were dealing with hundreds or thousands of people, a case-by-case review would be functionally impossible. They'd be forced into automated decisions. But because the volume is so tightly controlled, they can actually afford to exercise this high degree of scrutiny.
And that leads us directly to the most fascinating detail in the entire statement, at least from a diplomatic perspective. The numerical cap.
The magic number.
The magic number. They set a specific upper limit. The acceptance consideration would be strictly limited, including an upper ceiling of no more than 10 persons per year.
10. Just 10 people a year, maximum. Let's really just pause on that number for a second.
It's tiny.
It's microscopic. To put that in perspective, as the statement itself notes, the U.S. hosts millions of refugees and asylum seekers. In any given year, the U.S. might process tens of thousands of individuals through its resettlement system.
So accepting 10 individuals is a drop in the ocean.
It's not even a drop. It's a negligible, statistically invisible contribution to alleviating the U.S. burden on a global scale.
So it sounds less like a genuine humanitarian aid program and more like a symbolic gesture.
Exactly. If the goal was practical, meaningful burden sharing, that number would have to be in the hundreds, maybe even thousands, depending on A&B's capacity.
So then you have to ask, why agree to the program at all if the number is so vanishingly small?
Because the number 10 is not chosen for humanitarian relief. It is chosen for maximum political manageability and minimum domestic risk. It suggests a gesture of solidarity, a good faith diplomatic step that allows A&B to be counted among the responsible states without actually incurring any significant security or social costs.
And they're quick to stress that even this ceiling is still subject entirely to the government's discretion.
Right. They don't have to take 10. 10 is just the absolute maximum they will even consider. They could choose to take 0. Or 2. Or 5.
Whatever they're comfortable with in a given year.
Exactly. The number 10 is just the outer boundary of their political tolerance. It makes the risk politically and socially manageable. I mean, for a small island nation, integrating 10 non-citizens annually, especially those with potentially complex refugee backgrounds, is still a significant administrative undertaking. But
it's not going to break the system.
It cannot destabilize their security or their social fabric. Now, if they had set the number at 100 or 200,
then local resources, schools, housing, healthcare would immediately become a huge political issue.
Immediately. At 10, that concern is essentially neutralized before it can even become a debate.
So if we contrast this incredibly small number with the global scope of the refugee crisis they mentioned, it really does illustrate A&B's careful balancing act.
It's a masterclass in it.
They are participating in international cooperation just enough to be seen as a reliable partner.
But they are imposing restrictions that are so stringent that they can guarantee their domestic security and sovereignty remain completely untouched.
So this is the core insight we should take away from this then.
Yeah.
The limit of 10 persons a year functions primarily as a signal of partnership.
It's diplomatic currency, a currency they can use to facilitate other objectives, rather than a fundamental policy shift on immigration. It's a very low-cost way to buy a lot of diplomatic goodwill.
They get to publicly say, we are helping our partners in the U.S. with their immense humanitarian challenge.
Even if the actual practical help is almost purely symbolic.
And just to tie a bow on this section, tying back to the different categories of migrants, the statement reiterates one final non-negotiable condition.
Yeah.
And this is clearly for maximum public assurance.
The criminal record exclusion.
Right. No person with criminal record would be accepted, full stop.
This just emphasizes that the only individuals being considered are those who fall into that very narrow category of non-criminal refugees who are facing serious harm if they go home.
So the government is ruling out the two groups that cause the most public anxiety. People with criminal histories and people who are just administrative deportees.
It creates a very, very tightly controlled aperture, a very narrow gateway. They are looking for the absolute least risky individuals within the most desperate category of migrants, those who qualify for refugee status but are also non-criminal.
So the strict vetting and this tiny numerical cap, together, they define the absolute limits of A and B's willingness to engage.
It's a commitment that is, by design, more symbolic than substantial. And that's precisely why it is politically feasible for them to do it.
Okay, so now we have to shift from the how, the mechanics of the agreement, to the why, the motivation behind it. We have to move past the political theater and into the realm of real statecraft.
Why do this at all? Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to analyze A and B's stated motive. The statement says the consideration was authorized by the Prime Minister and the Attorney General as an act of good faith.
An act of good faith.
Yes, reflecting a willingness to cooperate with international partners. That phrase, act of good faith, is a very carefully chosen piece of diplomatic language.
What does it signal?
It implies trust, mutual respect, and a commitment to shared humanitarian values. It frames the action as ethical and responsible, rather than something done for material or financial gain. They're trying to set a very particular tone for the discussion.
And they explicitly deny that there was any kind of quid pro quo, a direct transaction.
Very explicitly.
The statement denies that this small gesture was a concession or an attempt to, trade people or an effort to curry favor in exchange for some other specific benefit.
Instead, it's presented as a measured diplomatic gesture, taken alongside many other responsible states.
Which suggests that A and B sees international responsibility as a value that's consistent with its own national interests, as long as, safety and lawfulness are maintained.
Right. That just being seen as a responsible global citizen has its own non-monetary value. They are very carefully managing the public narrative here.
How so?
By defining this as a measured diplomatic gesture, they elevate it. It's not a simple transaction anymore. They place it into the sphere of high-level statecraft. It becomes a way of building political capital and demonstrating alignment with key allies, especially the U.S., without having to spend significant domestic resources or take on any undue risks.
So diplomatic goodwill is a currency that can be spent later.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But they are being very careful not to admit that they are spending it right now for something specific in return.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. This is where that claim of no quid pro quo has to be examined critically, because the statement itself seems to contradict that, or at least complicate it. Despite the denial, the statement immediately pivots to reveal that A and B is currently engaged in other concurrent discussions with the United States.
And the timing of this reveal is not an accident.
It seems highly strategic. They list two very concrete areas of ongoing bilateral negotiation that directly affect every single Antiguan and Barbudan citizen.
Yes, and the timing of this announcement revealing these concurrent discussions in the same press release is the entire deep dive, really. They're essentially saying, we did this small, safe thing over here with the MOU, and by the way, simultaneously, we are talking about these major national interests over there.
So whether or not a direct trade was made, the presentation itself establishes a clear link in the public's mind.
It connects the act of cooperation with the pursuit of national goals.
Let's look at point A. They are discussing the restoration of normal visa issuance and renewals for Antiguan and Barbudan nationals. This is a huge, practical, citizen-facing benefit. This touches nearly every family and business on the island.
It's absolutely critical. For any Caribbean notion, access to U.S. visas is vital for the health of bilateral relations. It directly impacts business, travel, education, family reunification, everything.
So if visa processing is slow or difficult,
It significantly hinders the citizens and the economy. So bringing this issue up in the same statement, immediately after discussing the refugee MOU, it signals that A and B is actively working on tangible, high-value benefits for its own people. It serves as a political justification for the diplomatic goodwill they are accruing with this MOU.
it's the answer to the question, what are we getting out of this?
Exactly.
Okay, and then there's point B. They are discussing technical issues relating to biometric standards and international identity assurance. Now, for a lot of us, this might sound like boring bureaucracy.
It might sound boring, but for a country like A&B, this is absolutely vital to their global standing and their economy. Because technical compliance with international identity protocols, especially the ones used by, say, U.S. Homeland Security, is fundamental to maintaining the value and integrity of the Antiguan and Barbudan passport.
How?
If their biometric standards aren't up to scratch, or if they're seen as lagging in international identity verification, the U.S. and other large nations may subject their citizens to heightened scrutiny, to travel restrictions, to painful border delays.
And for a small island developing state whose economy relies so heavily on tourism and international finance,
ensuring their passport is trusted and their identity standards are robust is a non-negotiable security requirement. If A&B can make sure their biometric standards meet U.S. requirements, it eases travel for their citizens, and it improves the country's overall standing in global security assessments, which in turn protects their economy.
Okay, so let's put it all together. Let's synthesize these two sets of discussions, the symbolic refugee cooperation for a maximum of 10 people, and these very concrete talks on visas and biometrics.
Right.
A&B seems to be framing this entire scenario as just normal international relations, but with a highly strategic narrative.
That's a perfect way to put it. The principle they're articulating is very clear. Good faith cooperation across a whole range of issues. Humanitarian, economic, security is just a normal feature of international relations.
So they're saying we talk about everything all the time.
We talk about humanitarian support. We talk about economic issues. We talk about travel standards. And if we show up as a reliable, good faith partner on the refugee front, that fosters an environment where the U.S. is more willing and more likely to work with us on our priority issues.
So it's the soft power of diplomacy. The refugee gesture might not be a transactional quid pro quo. They didn't sign the MOU and immediately get visa renewal in return, but it creates the political climate.
It creates the climate necessary for favorable outcomes on those other more pressing national issues. That is precisely the analysis. This statement publicly links the highly symbolic refugee discussion to very concrete national interests like visa renewals.
It provides a strategic context for the good faith gesture without ever admitting to a direct transactional trade.
It allows the government to tell its domestic audience, look, we are being responsible global partners, and that diplomatic status helps us achieve our own necessary national goals, like making it easier for you to travel and do business. It's a very sophisticated way to justify a potentially controversial engagement, a masterful piece of political communication, really.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into this one highly specific but incredibly revealing official statement. It really shows the delicate dance between sovereignty, security, and international cooperation. Okay, so let's quickly summarize the key takeaways we've established based purely on the official government statement from January 5th, 2026.
Let's do it.
First, and maybe most importantly, the entire arrangement is non-binding. It's an MOU, not a treaty.
Which means it can be terminated at any time, at A&B's sole discretion. They hold the ultimate control mechanism. There's an escape hatch.
Second, the ceiling is extremely low, a maximum of 10 persons per year. And the selection of those individuals is strictly controlled by A&B.
On a case-by-case basis, and it's conditional upon their own internal intelligence and national security assessments, they have the final say.
Third, the people being considered fall into a very narrow humanitarian category. They are non-criminal refugees.
People who meet the criteria for protection because they face risk of harm or persecution. They are explicitly not deportees or individuals with criminal records. That line is drawn very clearly.
And finally, the whole action is positioned as a carefully measured diplomatic gesture. It's consistent with their sovereign control. It's undertaken alongside 100 other nations.
And it just so happens to be happening while there are active negotiations on direct national interests, like visa issues and biometric standards.
Right. It signals good faith international partnership.
The overarching message they're sending is crystal clear. Antigua and Barbuda remains a sovereign state, fully in control of its decisions and its borders. They are acting, in their words, prudently, transparently, and in the best interests of the people.
The statement is a strong exercise in communication designed to calm fears and assert national autonomy.
And that decision to accept the possibility of 10 people a year is, at its core, a political cost management strategy.
A fascinating case study.
It really is. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider.
Okay.
Given the government's explicit denial of a quid pro quo, but the simultaneous revelation of these active negotiations on tangible national interests, Visa renewals, biometric standards. What is the true currency of this good faith gesture? The 10 persons, maximum, will not solve the U.S. refugee crisis. That's obvious.
Not even close.
But they certainly seem to grease the wheels of bilateral diplomacy. They allow A and B to leverage their symbolic cooperation to, hopefully, achieve concrete, measurable benefits for their own citizens. So you have to ask yourself, how does the announcement of such a low numerical cap function, less as an immigration policy and more as a high-stakes diplomatic signal of partnership? And what is the real value of that signal in broader bilateral relations? That right there is the value of international cooperation for a small state.
Fantastic analysis. That's all for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the facts from the speculation. And remember to always consider the diplomatic context behind the policy. We'll see you next time.